The fear of big things is an eerily common fear. It's much less rare than you may realize. It seems somewhat irrational, at least at first. But megalophobia, or the fear of the huge, makes a lot more sense than what's on the surface. In fact, the fear of big things can be the most justified phobia of them all. It's why, when you really think about megalophobia and all its horrors, the possibilities it entails, the fact it concerns literally everybody, it starts to make sense why so many people have this seemingly strange fear. Megalophobia seems to be universal. It's the kind of fear that even if you don't have it with one example, you probably have it with another. Because the fear of massive structures, space, the never-ending void of the ocean, or monsters larger than what could be naturally possible, are all fears and phobias in their own right, but also all fall under the umbrella of megalophobia. It's a concept with a lot more depth than you may think. The rabbit hole of megalophobia runs deep, and you'll come to find that this fear is literally everywhere. So let's have a look at megalophobia and its many sides, from the most massive structures to the absolutely colossal monsters, and the many things in between and beyond. By the time you're done, you might discover a fear you never knew you had. This is the Golden Finance 117 building in Tianjin, China. It is the 6th largest building in the world. It's nearly 2,000 feet tall, but it holds a dark secret. You've probably never heard of it, because it's routinely absent from rankings of the tallest skyscrapers. Its size is comparable to great structures like the Shanghai Tower, and only 700 feet behind the Burj Khalifa, the tallest skyscraper on Earth. And yet, nobody ever talks about it. Nobody ever recognizes it as the 6th tallest building, and there's a reason for this. The building was originally meant to be a centerpiece for a luxury real estate project within Tianjin, but this isn't what happened. After the 2008 recession and China's 2015 stock bubble burst, Golden Finance 117, along with being the 6th tallest building on Earth, is also the tallest abandoned building on Earth. It's a ghost that haunts the skyline of Tianjin. There's something so compelling about a skyscraper this size being deserted completely. The significance of the structure demands some sort of respect. Whenever we see large megastructures in media or massive complexes in real life, we can be in awe of just how big they are. But we can at least know that there's some point to their size. It's like this with the other top 10 largest buildings on Earth. But there's something so unsettling about structures so huge that serve no purpose. Massive skyscrapers are used for utility, sure. But secondarily, they serve to show just how economically prosperous the nation that built it is. An abandoned building of that scale makes no sense. So it still stands that even today, if you search up 6th tallest building in the world, the Lade World Tower will come up, the 7th largest building in the world. Nobody wants to give an abandoned giant the honor of being in the top 10, because it feels uncomfortable including a forgotten Goliath on the list. It's a building everyone wants to forget about, but how can they when it eats the skies of Tianjin? But at least Golden Finance actually had the courtesy of existing. There are several skyscrapers and large buildings that simply don't exist, that were only conceptualized on paper and never came to fruition. These buildings often aren't built because their scale is simply so immense. But it's still interesting that some of these structures were even proposed and given serious consideration. Works like Isaac Newton's Cenotaph by Etienne Louis Boulle, proposed in 1784, or the Basilica, also proposed by Boulle in 1781 to 1782. But I think my favorite example, and also probably the most evil-looking building I've ever seen actually be considered for construction, is called the Palace of the Soviets, and it was proposed in 1933. If constructed, it would have been over 100 feet taller than the Empire State Building, with a quarter of that height coming from the massive statue of Vladimir Lenin on the very top, which would have been double the height of the Statue of Liberty from heel to torch. Because of its immense size of 1,365 feet, it would have been visible from most of Moscow, where it was planned to be built, and would have been the tallest building on Earth at the time. The base was completed in 1939, but because of the German invasion, the project was ended in 1941. When imagined what it might have looked like in the modern day, It looks so out of place next to the highways and the surrounding buildings of Moscow. Ironic in modern day Moscow, next to advertisements, billboards, and foreign cars that would be a staple of the American culture the Soviets detested so much. But again, at least the structure had some sort of intentionality behind it. It was meant to be built, even if the foundation wasn't completed. There are many architectural concepts that don't even get this honor. I find that the most interesting and downright terrifying architecture doesn't even exist. It's called fantasy architecture, and you've definitely seen it before. Any kind of structure that isn't real in games, movies, and all kinds of fiction is considered fantasy architecture. But when it comes to the most immense and colossal examples of fantasy architecture, I think the work of Russian architectural theorist Arthur Scisali Weiss comes to mind. Weiss's work feels so homely, yet out of place. At a first glance, it looks like something that could actually be made, until you look at it a little closer. You look around the image and begin to notice that none of this stuff serves any practical use. Some common themes in Weiss's work are tranquil bodies of water, which contrast with bustling retro-futuristic Victorian-era cities surrounding them, usually with an abundance of people or sailboats to show just how large the buildings are. They don't even seem to be doing anything in a lot of the pieces, just there to show the true scale of these titans. My favorite of his works is probably the piece known as the Magic City, because it shows everything Weiss's work is. It is an incredibly dense city, situated on top of massive Victorian columns. Underneath, there's a grand staircase leading to the underbelly of the city. I love this artwork, specifically because it demonstrates just how impractical Weiss's work is. The city itself looks too dense to even live in. It seems to be in the air simply for the sake of being in the air. How would one even get to this place? What are the people below it doing? Most of Weiss's work is just as, if not more impractical than this. But what they all have in common is a hugeness that seems to be the only reason for their existence. We can only guess as to what the purpose of these structures are. The best way I could describe it would be like if instead of forming mountains, caves, and forests, the earth was made purely out of buildings, not built by or for people. And like we confusingly traveled the colossal landscapes of Earth for thousands of years, so too do the people in Weiss's work travel the endless megastructures. At least, however, Weiss's work is coherent. Even without a definite purpose, you could tell that that's some sort of tower or a bridge or some kind of platform. The same cannot be said for the megalophobic works of Brent Wong. Have you ever seen things in your dreams? Things your brain creates that are so weird you can't help but think about them long after you wake up? This could be a strange situation you find yourself in, or a strange looking room in the dream. For the paintings of Brent Wong, those weird things would be the monoliths in the back of uncanny landscapes. Wong's art depicts these homogeneous, otherworldly landscapes, sometimes with some sort of house in the foreground, sometimes not. What they all share, though, is the overwhelmingly massive things in the background. Things are the best description I can give them. They don't look like anything at all. I would say Wong's work is akin to early attempts at CGI. It would make sense that these structures in the background don't have any shape if they were simply testing geometry in some early CGI software. So you wouldn't be blamed for thinking some inspiration came from the uncanny look of old computer-generated imagery. But you would be wrong, because Wong painted most of his works in the 70s, a time before CGI became commonplace. It's kind of weird how in his works, Wong was able to predict the aesthetics of something that hadn't even come out yet. I get such a weird feeling looking at these paintings. The fractured buildings seemingly alone in a world without life. The structures in the sky bigger than one could even imagine. Most are larger than entire mountains. Some look like they're in orbit. I get a feeling of sadness and dread when looking at them. The solitary homes in the middle of a vast, unending, barren wasteland with an unexplainable structure in the sky. It's the sense of stillness these images produce that give me a strange sense of calmness. Like I could just take a seat and simply look out into the landscape and just relax. But there's still an unmistakable fear I have of Wong's paintings. None of the architecture I've mentioned so far would ever be built. Golden Finance 117 sits as a dead giant. Weiss's works will never be built and serve no purpose to any people. But at least you can tell what they even are. Wong's structures feel hostile in the way that it's impossible to discern their true intentions. The buildings in the foreground in particular look so out of place and just plain weird in a way that's hard to describe, and some of them are clearly abandoned as evidenced by the decay, destruction they have endured. But even for the structures completely intact, I feel a sense that there are no people there, that no person had any part in making this. The giants in the background give a similar feeling, a feeling that whatever this thing is, it wasn't man-made, but it also wasn't natural. Some sort of anomaly. Either way, the structures of Wong's paintings are much different than the buildings and works I mentioned earlier. They don't even feel somewhat human-made, but not in the same way Weiss's work doesn't feel human-made. At least Weiss attempted to mimic humanity in his structures. Wong's works are simply uncanny. But I think when it comes to abstractions of human-made architecture, Wong goes too far. Something I find more fascinating when it comes to megalophobic architecture is the enduring idea of the megastructure. Megastructures are effective in their goal, that goal usually being to represent the might of a civilization. Big things command people's respect. It's why the Palace of the Soviets was planned to be 1,300 feet tall when it was initially meant to be half that. Awe is a universal language. But when it comes to the scariest type of megastructure, there is a subcategory. One that is haunting in a way unlike typical horror, but can be just as, if not scarier. It's the non-man-made megastructure. The megastructure either built by some form of AI, or even more eerie, a megastructure built by something completely unknown. Blam is a great example of a non-man-made megastructure, where humans are forced to survive in a city far larger than Earth. In fact, it's even larger than the distance between the Earth and the Sun, 5 times over. But this still isn't the most terrifying megastructure in fiction, in my opinion. I still think there's a megastructure even more disquieting and eerie than Blam, or any other fictional megastructures I've ever come across. And it's to date, the scariest megastructure in any media I've ever seen. It's a game called Lorn's Lure. Lorn's Lure has quite the simple concept at first glance. Our main character follows a weird orb thing into an abyss and ends up in a megastructure with seemingly no end. He has been exploring for 253 years. Your job is to find a way out. There is some hope though. You spend most of the game following this weird-looking owl that looks like it might take you back to the blissful home colony you came from. That's the entire premise. But taking a deeper look at the megastructure itself reveals what I find just so unsettling about the whole experience. There is always a lingering thought you have when playing. At least I had it. It's never brought up specifically by any of the characters, nor is it really the main focus. But I can't help but wonder, who built this place? A part of me wants to think it's natural, that in this world, pipelines, switches, and train tracks are just as normal as mountains and valleys for us. But it doesn't seem random. It seems oddly designed. You can discern a purpose for some of these places in a way that doesn't apply to caves and forests. There are winding waste tunnels, there are ancient cisterns, religious symbols, entire cities, and the ruins of castles. There seems to be some intentionality behind the design. These places aren't random. Someone or something built them. The intentionality of this place contrasts heavily with its pure size. Who could have made this, and for what purpose? It's a place you could explore for 250 years without ever going the same way twice. A place where you can fall for minutes without hitting the ground. What could have possibly created this? The people who live here don't seem to question it. But then I also wonder other things. Just how old is this place? You often come across ruins of buildings and settlements on your journey, objects and people being described as ancient. You yourself have been here for over 250 years, so what is the age of the structure? Has it been here for thousands of years? Millions? Billions? Since time itself began? It seems like there isn't enough time from the creation of the universe till now to build something so massive. It's an existential dread derived from the hopelessness in ever attempting to categorize or explain it. It's an anomaly that people are simply forced to live with. The megastructure itself also isn't static. It refuses to categorize itself into any conceivable place. You'll go from hard concrete and metal areas to these landscapes with fungus-like growth, attempting to be almost natural in a way, to waste tunnels, to cities, to areas that more resemble deserts than any human-made structures. The size of the megastructure is completely unknown. You feel as if you are making some progress with the constant change in environment, but for all you know, in 253 years, you haven't even made so much as a dent in the megastructure's exploration. Routinely in Lorn's Lure, you spend 30 minutes thinking you've made a good amount of progress, only to turn around and realize that, relative to your surroundings, you haven't even moved an inch. You can't help but feel that in this structure, a foot and 1,000 miles might as well be the same distance. The best representation of this is when you fall, and you fall a lot. Typically, if you fall, you will only go down a couple seconds before respawning, or you can just press T and go back to where you began anyways. But in some rare instances, when you fall, you don't simply go back. There are parts of the game where you can fall for over a minute before hitting the ground, and it's weirdly blissful. The vastity of your environment is revealed to you when you drop. You don't even feel like you're falling, more like flying or floating. Things are just too big to register the fact that you are diving down at high speeds. You could fall forever if you simply kept missing the floor and finding a way to continue. In this megastructure, you're more likely to die of dehydration if you fall off the edge than ever actually hitting the ground. And yet, the inhabitants you do find in Lorn's Lure seem to all care much more about fighting each other than figuring out where they even are. Even in a place as terrifying and mysterious as this, we still find ways to kill each other. You often find these sites of ancient battles with the dead scattered around and preserved. But the megastructure has swallowed this history whole. All we see is the battlefield as it is, possibly thousands of years after it happened. And when you observe war from that perspective, all you see are the bones. It's a megastructure that erases memory. It removes history because there is no hope of any conceivable plot of events being documented in a place so big. Nobody knows why it's here or what these ancient wars even were. I doubt they even know what they're fighting for in modern times. The echoes of civilization dissipate into the walls of the megastructure, never to be heard again. The megastructure is a place designed to forget everything. It's a place where actions and the individuals are pointless in the face of enormity. All of these warring tribes are like ant colonies fighting other ant colonies, while being unaware of why they exist, where they do, and just how large everything could be. The hopelessness of the megastructure leads to blood, because dying in a war is much less scary than the prospect of confronting the existential angst of living in a world like this. So the ants are unaware of the city their field resides, or the country that city is in, or the Earth that country is in, or the immense universe that is home for Earth. I wonder if it's like that for the megastructure. Just as the ants may see our homes as megastructures and wonder for what purpose it was built, and indeed be blissfully unaware of the outside world, maybe what built this place is beyond what we can comprehend. Maybe there is a world outside the structure where 1 billion miles can be braved in a single step by some unknown being. Maybe the megastructure is the interior walls of a home made for giants. Maybe it's an organ in some kind of mechanical body. Maybe it's a cell in some kind of organism. It really doesn't matter. Each explanation does nothing more than make the structure even bigger, the chance of leaving more hopeless. And in the end, you don't leave. You follow the owl, and you find you were lured into a trap. When you escape into the light, you find some kind of stone being, telling you that it's no use, to give up hope and never leaving. And the next time you see a light, just look the other way. It seems that hope in this world is the most potent of venoms, and so we will stay until our energy core runs dry. Maybe that'll take a few years, maybe it'll be a couple days, or maybe it'll be a couple thousand years. But whether it's minutes or millenniums worth of exploration, I have a feeling that in this place, they are equivalent. Trapped in an unforgiving place of metallic souls and meaningless wars where progress means nothing, and one you will never, ever escape. But Lorn's Lure, Blam, and all those artworks are imaginary megastructures, built of paintbrush and canvas, program and game engine. Of course, these can still be unsettling, but when it comes to the huge in real life, I think there's no question that the natural world around us can be 10 times as unsettling as these fictional places. Earth's gigantic landscapes can look alien and absolutely colossal. I especially like videos like this to show you the true scale of these beasts. Driving toward them, You get the feeling they're a part of the skybox in a way, that no matter how long you kept driving, you could never make it there. It feels like one of those megastructures looming over you. You can see things in the distance, but you know the distances are far too vast to ever reach. It seems no matter how tall we build, we can simply not beat out nature in pure, awe-inspiring scale. Even the tallest buildings have no trouble being absolutely crushed in scale by the largest mountains. And even individual mountains can't compete with the vastness of the biomes in which they reside. Desert sand dunes rise to the sky, all numerous and gigantic. Mountain ranges like that of the Alps, Himalayas, and Rockies, encasing hundreds of peaks. All multiple times larger than anything we could ever hope to make. The ocean, in its enormity and vastness, shows no mercy to the vessels we attempt to explore it with. When on some kind of ship, you're one unlucky storm away from something like this happening. These aren't even the biggest waves the ocean can produce, not even close. The ocean is so vast and can produce things so big that you aren't even safe from it on land. The largest tsunami ever recorded was so incredible in size that glaciers in the distance that could not be seen where some people were watching it happen reportedly were as clear as day because the wave of the tsunami was so high it pushed the glacier above the surrounding mountains. When it comes to the biggest things that can be created, our buildings don't hold a candle to nature. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The tsunami in question was called the Lituya Bay Mega Tsunami. It was caused by a 7.8 magnitude earthquake that shook loose huge chunks of rock from the mountainside. 30.6 million cubic meters of rock fell into the water, which is how it initially began. Luckily, the location was remote enough not to be extremely deadly, only having 5 total victims, but its scale was off the charts. Do you want to know how massive this tsunami was? For some perspective, the second largest tsunami was Mount St. Helens tsunami, and it was half the size of the Lituya Bay tsunami. To give you an even grander scale as to how massive this tsunami was, one account from Vivian and Bill Swanson, who were both on an anchored fishboat in a cove near the west side of the bay when the tsunami hit, reported hearing a strange jolt, walked outside the bunk of their boat, and to their absolute shock, they could see the Lituya Glacier. This was surprising, because where they were anchored in Anchorage Cove, it was impossible to see the Lituya Glacier. Unless it had, for whatever reason, risen hundreds of feet into the air and got much closer. Which, according to the account, seems to be exactly what that tsunami did. But tsunamis aren't even the biggest natural disasters our species endures. Volcano eruptions and the ensuing plumes, or the smoke and ash caused by the eruption, are absolutely gigantic. They can penetrate the stratosphere with their smoke, and the sight from the ground can only be described as awe-inspiring. The largest one of these happened in January 2022, and you might have actually felt the effects of the eruption without realizing, because the shockwave from the volcano itself went around Earth 4 times, and the plume it created was beyond massive. The largest ever recorded, in fact. It went 36 miles into the sky. It was the first ever volcanic plume to break through the stratosphere and enter the mesosphere. The force of the volcano itself was estimated at 61 megatons of TNT, even more force than the SAR bomb, the largest nuclear bomb ever detonated. And you want to know the most terrifying part? It also ended up creating the largest lightning storm ever recorded in history, nearly tripling the previous record. The plume was so big that it created its own weather systems. At its peak, the plume was producing 2,600 flashes of lightning per minute. The previous record was 993. 43 flashes of lightning per second, all situated within this terrifying plume. So far, I've talked about the scale of huge buildings, natural disasters, and megastructures, and while these dormant giants do have a place in this topic, the fear of these is very particular to people with megalophobia. Huge megastructures can be cool for a lot of people. Sure, natural disasters are terrible and destructive, but they can be a spectacle to watch unfold. Fantasy architecture is just straight up interesting to view, showing what the world could have looked like had we done something different. But I think there is a universal megalophobia, one that even you, someone who might not have this specific fear, might relate to. It's the fear of giant monsters, especially in media. These monsters have often been given the name Kaiju, a Japanese word roughly translating to strange creature. Movies like Godzilla and King Kong are all examples of Kaiju films, and in my opinion, these Kaiju might be the scariest and most devastating type of monster in horror. But aside from the famous examples like Godzilla, when used effectively, it can be the best kind of monster for producing dread in an audience. And I personally think that the examples I'll show are the most terrifying of the Kaiju genre. The term Kaiju was only coined in the 50s as a name for movies like Godzilla and the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. But world-ending massive monsters have existed for thousands of years across all cultures and mythology. Like Jormungandr in Norse mythology, an unfathomably large sea serpent, or the Kraken, a massive tentacled beast said to inhabit the deep ocean, originating in sightings of the giant squid off the coast of Norway in 1180. And even now, with the advent of the internet, we get massive monsters in the form of memes. I'm going somewhere with this, I swear. Alex Howard is a channel that creates these animations of massive monsters, usually destroying a city by merely walking. Usually, these monsters are viewed from the safety of an aircraft, so you can see their scale compared to the surrounding city. Unlike kaiju like Godzilla or King Kong that are roughly building-sized and destroy the individual structures in whatever city they're leveling, the monsters of Alex Howard don't even give that courtesy, destroying what Godzilla could destroy in a few minutes in a single unintentional step. The titles for these videos are often some variation of "What are you doing in this situation?" and honestly, it's a great description for these kinds of videos, as funny as it may be. Because really, what are you doing in this situation? What is the best course of action if the threat is of an incomparable size to you? Run away? Good luck. Hide? Be prepared to get crushed. These massive monsters represent a kind of hopelessness, and it's why they are often depicted as the harbingers of the apocalypse. Because a threat of that scale is universal. The monster doesn't go away once you exit the scary woods or leave the haunted house, and it doesn't only affect one person or a group of people. A monster like this is capable of ending the world. There's a great series by the channel Moon Productions, an unofficial trilogy of terrifying videos called Creatures of the End Times, Creatures of the Fog, and Stay at Home as if this were outside. It is a trilogy depicting the world ending by gigantic eldritch horrors. The first video, Stay at Home as if this were outside, shows what looks to be a massive hand reaching down from the fog, showed from the perspective of someone on the ground recording from a distance. We hear screams and the video ends. It's short, but absolutely effective in conveying the scale of these threats. The second video, Creatures of the Fog, is longer. It starts with our character looking out into the fog, again, shot with a similar phone perspective. We hear some weird noises in the background. They almost sound like a whale's mating call. We see the camera person running around some more, through what looks like fields, until we see it. An absolutely gargantuan monster floating in the sky with what looks like tentacles or hair of some kind growing off of it. It quickly disappears into the fog, and he keeps going. After making it to a road, we hear what sounds like those noises from the start again, only this time much louder and closer. They begin running down the street, and the noise only gets louder and more distorted behind them, and the video cuts to black. The final video in the series is the most overtly kaiju-inspired out of the three. It's called Creatures of the End Time. It starts with a shot of some sort of weather anomaly in the sky. We then cut to a tornado, and some sort of massive creature next to it, reaching into the sky. The narration reveals that these creatures are what is responsible for the end of the world. We can't even begin to imagine how large this creature is. All we see is its legs. It seems the rest of its body extends into the clouds above, making it impossible to know its true size. We cut to shots of buildings with the silhouettes of people made entirely out of what looks to be ash. As the commenter Fiend Folia, Real or Fake, points out, these shadows on the wall resemble those created by people when a nuclear blast happens, which implies that not even nuclear weapons were enough to stop these monsters. At the end, we see a collection of lights dancing across a town, and the video ends. These videos are incredible at conveying cosmic horror. This threat to humanity, eldritch in every way. It's not a traditional apocalypse where the bombs drop or the dead rise, but instead a much more dreadful one of monstrous proportions. one that couldn't even be stopped by our most powerful weapons. Something truly worthy of being a threat to humanity, hiding in the fog. I love the fog in this series specifically, because it's what creates the sense of cosmic horror. It makes the threat unseen. A massive hand reaches down from who knows what source. The clouds concealing the true scale of a monster unaffected by the tornado next to it. The fog hides the horror, and ironically, that makes it all the more terrifying. I love when things are concealed in horror media. I think I made that apparent enough in my previous video, but I especially love this concealment when concerning huge things. Things so big that they get blocked out by clouds or fog. I especially love when the true sizes of these things are only revealed at the very end. Also, spoilers for the movie The Mist. In the 2007 movie The Mist, this is exactly what happens. It's only at the end we actually see the true scale of what's hiding in the fog. The Mist is a film mostly about survival. At least that's part of it. It's about how in desperate times, people can turn to their most primal instincts. But the movie is also about threats so large that they are impossible to comprehend by the human mind. This plot point is developed all throughout the film, and the build-up to what we see at the end is genius. Most of the film takes place in a grocery store, where people are trapped inside for days by a thick fog. A fog that seems to deliver death to anyone that enters it. We have no idea what's out there. We get some clues, massive bugs flying onto the windows, even bigger monsters attacking those bugs, tentacles coming out of an open garage swallowing a man whole. But we never see exactly what's out there, at least not until the very end. Due to several circumstances inside of the store, our main characters leave into the mist. The plan is to find their car and see how far they can get with the remaining fuel in hopes of getting clear of the mist. It is here that we see what has been hiding outside the entire time. Still partially concealed by the mist, we see a monster much bigger than the store, much bigger than the surrounding buildings, and definitely much bigger than the people around it. A force that is not of this world, and its horror is still shrouded in the mist, with only a terrifyingly large silhouette to make it out. The characters quickly run to the car and get on the road. By this point, you think you've seen the biggest thing the mist can produce, that there can't possibly be a monster larger and deadlier than the one outside the grocery store. Well, you would be wrong, because they are not alone on their drive out of town. Eventually, upon driving further, the car reaches a stop, and the ground begins to shake. You would think it's an earthquake by the sound of it, but the ground goes from shaking to sporadically jumping in a pattern unlike anything natural. It is then that we see it, a monster with an ankle twice the size of the one we saw earlier. This time, we are able to get a good look at it. It's a beast so large that it doesn't even concern itself with the characters. Because why would it? What reason does a human have to meddle with an ant next to its feet? The characters are enamored by it. Who wouldn't be? It seems to be so massive that it doesn't have an actual food source, at least not here. The only damage it does is the unintentional squashing of people and entire buildings under its feet. It's a monster so big that it has no reason to destroy anything intentionally. Rather, its stride does more than enough to terrorize the environment. And as quickly as it appears, it's gone. And you can't help but think, what else could be in the mist? What if that wasn't even the worst of it? What if there are monsters the size of mountains? Monsters that reach to the stratosphere? What else might be here? The mist hides all. The movie will show you a monster, then another, each larger than the one that came before it. And when it gets to its largest, it doesn't even need to show you another one for you to get the point. It's very much arguable whether The Mist can be considered a kaiju movie, but for a movie that's far less subtle than The Mist when it comes to its monster, look no further than the film Cloverfield. The movie is a lot more overtly kaiju than The Mist, in that the entire plot is a giant monster attacking a city. The thing is, Cloverfield is a found footage movie, all about the people on the ground during this massive monster attack. It's set in 2000s New York, and the movie itself is haunting. In most kaiju films, like Godzilla, you get a very bird's eye view of the destruction. This is great for cinematography and showing just how destructive the monster is. Also, in most kaiju movies, the kaiju itself is the main character. It's really hard to find someone or something as important as the monster. So when the monster is the thing constantly being filmed, we tend to forget the human consequences of massive buildings and homes being destroyed every few minutes. The entirety of Cloverfield seems to be a response to this. It's a movie all about a group of people trying to get away from the monster, and it does an absolutely phenomenal job of showing the true scale of a kaiju attack. And I think because of this, it can be called the most honest kaiju movie. In most kaiju films, the destruction is so severe that we tend to determine the damage the kaiju did by seeing how many buildings it destroyed, because we get such a macro view of the entire situation that it's really hard to look at the casualties from a human perspective. When watching a kaiju film, I think we tend to forget just how big a skyscraper is. From the ground up, it's a giant rising into the sky, 100 times bigger than yourself. They are mammoth structures that show you the true power of human ingenuity, and they can give you a sense of megalophobia on their own. But from the top down, buildings look almost dinky, and a kaiju attack looks like a kid smashing Legos. But when a building is destroyed from the ground, we get an incredible spectacle. A show of glass and concrete, a dead god falling from the heavens down onto the streets below, producing a mist of debris traveling much faster than any car, promising to snuff out any air you hope to get after it falls. This sort of thing is why found footage was a perfect choice for the genre. We can see the true horrors of a kaiju attack, what happens when these buildings fall, when so many people attempt to escape at once, when you get caught in the crossfire of the military and the monster. It is incredible how well it works. But let's talk about the monster itself. Its name is Clover, or at least that's what everyone calls it. The monster itself is 240 to 300 feet tall, which really isn't that much compared to traditional kaiju, of course. But the scary part is, it has been confirmed that Clover was only a baby in this film. Just how big could Clover be if it was an adult? We don't have to imagine, because in the third entry of the kind of official, kind of unofficial Cloverfield trilogy, we see what Clover looks like as an adult. And needless to say, it got bigger. There's some debate over whether this is Clover as a grown-up or whether it's Clover's mom or dad, but whatever this thing is, one thing's for sure, it is absolutely gigantic. So big, we don't even really know how big it is. The generally agreed upon size is 3,000 to 6,500 feet, but some say it could be even taller than that depending on the height of the clouds. Some even put the number as high as 30,000 feet, taller than Mount Everest. If this thing found its way to New York, it could level the entire city in a single unintentional step. There would be no need for a film, because the destruction would be over in mere seconds. In the end though, I think this is my favorite kaiju movie, just because it does such a good job at communicating just how devastating it would be. How huge the monster is, the fact it can cut the entire Brooklyn Bridge in half on accident with its tail. It's tragic, but also incredible when you look at its ability to devastate. If we're talking about the devastation of cities though, I think it might be crucial, if not necessary, to talk about a wider kind of devastation. The devastation of an entire country. And not in a traditional post-apocalyptic way, more like a time where things simply stopped being civilized, with only ruins of massive structures to show for societies that no longer exist. In Simon Stålenhag's art book / graphic novel The Electric State, this version of America is all that's left. After a hyper-addictive form of virtual reality called the Neurocaster proliferates, the masses begin preferring it to reality. We see corpses with Neurocasters still covering their eyes, skeletons of people so addicted to Neurocasters that they didn't even take them off to eat. As a result, the world goes out in a quiet whimper, one where people simply gave up on reality. But this isn't the only thing the Electric State has to offer. No. There is something much deeper, scarier, and larger hiding in this post-apocalyptic America, waiting to come out of the shadows. The Electric State is all about the America that comes out of this apocalypse, an America not ruined by bombs. There are no zombie outbreaks or any other of the many post-apocalyptic scenarios. Instead, it's an apocalypse of memory. People simply forget about the world. We follow a young woman named Michelle and her robot friend Skip as they make their way to the Pacific Ocean, documenting their travels in the western United States along the way. And I'm not the first to say this, but it's pretty much a post-apocalyptic road trip. In a world where the ruins of massive war vessels are baked into the landscape, where massive towers reaching into the clouds dwarf over residential neighborhoods and spew advertisements at the end of days. The entire world is completely abandoned. We routinely see massive ruin after massive ruin simply left to decay in the surrounding landscapes. So big and so aged that they almost seem a part of the landscape. Big groupings of specific structures like monolithic dormant robots all in the same field, battleships slowly rotting away on a coast, massive aircrafts used to fight an unnamed war. The melancholia of this world is illustrated through the sheer size of everything left behind. A massive graveyard of mechanical architecture cruelly left to rot as a roadside attraction for the rest of their days. Nearly every piece of art in the graphic novel is a depiction of Michelle and Skip's car on the road alone, next to ruins of immense sizes, like a mouse getting to the other side of a grand train station. All alone, wandering through the ruins of inorganic landscapes on a paved road while massive artificial mounds dot the journey. This is the entire plot of the Electric State. And yet, I cannot stop thinking about it. The striking images of these colossal graveyards are ingrained into my mind. These Neurocaster towers that we began seeing towards the end specifically give off such a haunting feeling. Because a tower, as absolutely gargantuan as it is only one in the dozens that we see throughout the Electric State. They aren't just large, they are plentiful. We can see them on nearly every page near the end. But even if only one of these structures existed, it would still be awe-inspiring. These liminal depictions of proportion make me feel an intense sense of scale, but it's also through these depictions that I feel something is off. And this feeling in the background of these images gets addressed later into the Electric State. There is an unseen threat in this world. We get subtle hints of what it might be, like empty police cars with several spent shell casings on the ground, as if the several bullets fired were ineffective at dispatching whatever target was being shot at. It suggests a kind of thing or entity existing within this world. But what could it be? Well, we find out a few pages later. While driving, a mechanical abomination escapes from the mist and into the street. It has tall legs. It appears to be an amalgam of several pieces of technology combined into one. It has thousands of cables coming from all around its body like tentacles, all vanishing into the mist. Michelle describes it as a complexity that doesn't look human-made, and one she's never seen before. It's clearly parts from various other pieces of technology stitched together, parts of a drone, a leg, an arm. It's a massive abomination, but not one without intentionality. The structure of its body has a purpose. According to Michelle, it functions clearly, with odd heaving movements under its surface that almost resemble breathing. And the biggest point of all, its size. Whatever made this thing, for whatever reason, needed it to be massive. The scale of the beast, next to the people with Neurocasters seemingly powering it, is haunting. It's not a monster that functions without purpose. Rather, purpose of the monster and the complex nature of its architecture are beyond what we can comprehend, making you wonder just what built the thing. In later pages we see more monsters, some seemingly taller than multi-story buildings, others hiding in the lakes and seas of this coastal town. And of course, there are monsters of architecture always prevailing the background. But we don't get any overt references to these giants being hostile. That is, until the final few pages. And it depicts the most terrifying illustration I've ever seen in any graphic novel. For context, a government agent is outside the house that Michelle and Skip are in. While making his way towards the house, something seems to awaken. It rumbles the ground and rises from the dirt. It slowly gets taller and taller, until the agent is face to face with a monster far more terrifying than any we had seen before. While the others looked like featureless scraps, this monster is different. It has a face, a smiling face with human-looking teeth. It towers over the house and the agent, cables covering portions of the beast's face and latching it down to the ground. Its face stuck in a smile wider than any human could achieve as it looks at the agent. Michelle and Skip hear the rumbling of this beast standing up, and when they eventually walk out of the house, they find nothing. No monster, no agent. The beast and its prey, gone within what I can only imagine to be mere minutes. Whatever these giants are, they aren't innocent. and I can't help but think that sooner or later, they'll catch up with Michelle and Skip. I also can't communicate just how effective Simon Stålenhag is as an artist. Every piece looks photorealistic and absolutely stunning. In many cases, it's even hard to tell that they're paintings until you really squint at the individual brushstrokes. And the designs of these mammoth creatures are both stunning and terrifying. The Electric State depicts an apocalypse, where the only thing left of us are the colossal. It's an apocalypse of the ginormous because they are the only thing significant enough to be admired in the end times. And if and when humans die out, I imagine what will remain of us, or at least last the longest, will be the massive things we build. It could be one reason we build huge, to preserve something, to make a mark on the world in the short time we have. It's why megalophobia is everywhere. It seems societies all over the world, in the past, present, and doubtless the future, will be enamored by the huge. We are fascinated by big things. The awe they produce in us is unlike anything else. We build the largest of towers and structures, and we imagine building them even larger regardless of if it were possible. We visualize the man-made infinities of megastructures. We imagine tiny humans confronting massive monsters. Even the apocalypse is seen through the lens of the huge. Because in the end, monumentality is the only language that everything that perceives this universe understands. We busy ourselves with the megastructures and vastness our minds create, but we ignore one fact. We live in a megastructure ourselves. And though the ones in Blam, Lorn's Lure, or Weiss's work are a different kind of megastructure, it's the same premise. As humans, we find ourselves in a world larger than we can imagine, left here confused without guidance. And a universe so massive that its scale is not only terrifying, but incomprehensible. We are the termites on the scale of continents, and the termites are mountains on the scale of the cells like a planet on the scale of atoms, and atoms like universes to the quarks that compose them. We can only wonder what the universe may look like compared to something else, because it is true that every time we proclaim something as the smallest thing, we always find something smaller. Always. Usually much, much smaller. And in all times, we have similarly proclaimed the universe to be a certain size. It always beats our expectation by incredible degrees, every single time. And maybe now, when we assert that the universe is the biggest thing that exists, we might also find something much, much bigger. We are dropped somewhere larger than we can imagine. We view the structures we create, the monsters, the buildings, the concepts, and we point in awe at their immensity, their scales, how they seem to scrape the skies. And yet, no matter how high our buildings go, no matter how big the monsters get, or how large of a structure the human mind can conjure, it is never bigger than what is already there. We live somewhere no giant monster, fictional megastructure, or vast landscape can hold a candle to. And as we explore this vast place, we must be content with the fact that things are simply too big to know. And that's okay. Humans love ambition. We often fall in love with the process of greatness. It is the worthy struggle that makes us happy, not the final destination. It is fitting, then, that we live in a place where we will never know everything, always in the process of learning more. In that way, it seems the universe is almost curated for our desire to struggle for knowledge. So maybe, we may look at the ginormous and think, maybe you are more human than anything else, because you make me stare in awe, with the never-ending curiosity that my species holds so dear.